He's gonna give us all this time. I'm gonna make sure every question is.
Yeah, I got it outside for
Hope you had a good weekend. Today I want to start by officially looking at the schedule for the week. Normally I just post this announcement. We don't discuss it much, but I want to emphasize two things. First of all, I think we will finish chapter 6 today, which means problems will be due on Friday, actually, because we have a guest on Wednesday. We may not actually finish chapter 6 today, but I think we will. If we don't finish chapter 6 today, then we'll finish it on Friday, and then the problems won't be due until after spring break. So what I really want to emphasize, though, is that on Wednesday, I invited a visitor to come. Her name is Jennifer Geekus. She's a Jewel alum, so she was a math major here. I had her in several classes. Currently, she's a business analytics manager at Evernorth Health Services. So she's coming just to talk to you about SQL, using SQL in your work. So SQL is her primary language. I think she uses some Python, but SQL is what my impression is that's almost exclusively what she uses. Also, of course, many of you are business intelligence. Oh, that's not me. Okay. Many of you are business intelligence track, right? So she's like doing what many of you would like to be doing, I think, when you get out of here. So she's a good person to talk to. So what that means is you should come to class on Wednesday with at least one question to ask her, preferably about SQL, but you can ask her about just being a working data scientist if you want to, whatever. But we should have something to ask her when she's done. She's going to hopefully show us some queries she uses in her work. Also, of course, if you invite a guest, it is rude not to show up, unless you have an excuse. So, unlike most classes, class on Wednesday is mandatory, right? So this class does not have an official attendance policy. So I'm not going to dock your grade if you don't show up, with the exception of when we have a guest. So I'm hoping to have other guests maybe in April. So we might have another day like this. But anyway, so of course, if you're sick or whatever, you can shoot me an email ahead of time saying you're sick. But if you don't have an excuse to miss class on Wednesday and you miss, it'll actually affect your grade, a 0 homework grade. Questions on that?
I'll have to talk with Dr. Howie because I know he wants. It shouldn't be an issue, but I'll just plan on meeting with him Tuesday or Thursday instead of because we have a mandatory 440 caps.
Oh, okay.
So I know that's between you. And
Yeah, so if he doesn't move it, I mean, that would be an excused absence for this,
Okay.
right? But yeah, mostly it's just you don't want to show up sick or something is all I'm saying.
Right.
Okay. Other questions about that? So again, think about what you want to ask a working data scientist who uses SQL all the time. A useful resource besides me, because as I've told you many times, I don't use SQL all the time. I use Python all the time. So there are plenty of things she can answer that I couldn't answer. Okay, so today what I want to do is do 3 things to finish up chapter 6. And again, I might be overly ambitious here, we'll see. But there are 3 things to finish out in the chapter, looking at average, looking at the having clause. So finally we get to having, and then we finish this the skeletal structure of a SQL query, basic SQL query. And then using case statements with group by is sort of a cute thing you can do. So we'll finish with that. Okay, so as always, I just want to show you several examples illustrating these. Let me walk through them one by one. So let's start with average. So some of you already know this. You've looked it up in the book. That's fine. I don't want to spend much time on it because it's just like a sum or a count, something like that. So we'll do average pretty quickly. But here's a question you could ask. What is the average original price in the vendor inventory table? You could ask something like that. So what I mean here is vendor inventory so if I run this, there's this original price column. Instead of summing it or counting it or whatever, you could average it if you feel like. And you could, of course, average by vendor or something if you wanted to. But first, let me just show you the average aggregate command. So I'm going to look at the vendor ID. Yes, let me ask this question slightly better. Per vendor. So let's just go ahead and do the group by. So for each vendor, what is the average original price that they're charging for their products? So vendor ID 7 charges $6.99 for a bunch of stuff. You could ask, well, what's the average of all that? They also charge, I gotta scroll away, it's like $3.49 for some stuff, you know. So you could ask just what's the average of all that. So if you want to see that, I'm going to group by vendor ID. So let me go ahead and just get that structure going. So collapse down each vendor like that. Within each vendor, we'll ask what's the average of that original price column, bless you. Also, just because the book does it all, you can always have more information if you want to. So I'm going to show the product IDs also. So count the number of different products they're offering. I don't want to recount this 1 every time. As different products offered. As always, you can make whatever names you want. So I'm going to count the number of different products they offer, and then I'm going to average, so AVG for average original price, and give that a name as average price. So I'll run this in a second, but just like any group by, it's going to think of each different vendor ID as a bucket. It's going to go within that bucket and then average, in this case, all the original prices that it sees. And it outputs this. So vendor 4 offers one different product from this table. There's missing information in this table, remember, right? So this isn't giving you a complete picture, but you go to battle with the data you have, you know. So here, vendor 4 offers one different product, and the average price is 50 cents. And as always, you could ask it to round this if you felt like, right? Like having all these extra zeros might be obnoxious to you. Vendor 7 offers 4 different products, and the average price is $3.82. Vendor 8 offering expensive products, I guess. Average original price is $14.17. So anyway, my only point here is that before we could put like a sum right there. Well, if you don't just want to add everything up, you want to also divide by the number of things you see to create an average. Right, you can do that. So just throw average into your toolkit with like sum, count, min, max. It's an aggregate function you can use with a group by statement. Is that okay? It's worth pointing out, so I will point it out, if it's worth pointing out, that when you tell SQL to do something, just like Python, I mean, it's going to do what you tell it to do. So we're asking it to average the price column entries that it sees for a given vendor. That's what you're asking it to do. If you think about it, that's kind of a weird thing to do, actually. So let me show you the vendor inventory table. So here, each date, it's showing you what product this vendor brought and how much they brought. So this is saying on like July 3rd, this vendor brought 7.38 pounds of whatever it is they're selling, tomatoes or something, right? And then they charge $6.99 for that, a pound. But then the next day they brought more, 11 pounds. And the next day they brought more, 13 pounds. But they're charging the same price per pound. You see that? So averaging these $6.99s is actually kind of a weird thing to do. Because it's not taking into account that they had different quantities on a given day. Does everybody see that? Like on a given day, they're actually bringing more stuff, so they actually have more worth in what they're bringing. So if you wanted to take that kind of thing into account, you could. So I'm going to keep this original query up. But consider something like this. I'm going to copy and paste it. Okay, so vendor ID count, blah, blah, blah. And then I keep my average. Oh, no, get rid of this. So get rid of this one and do sum quantity times original price as, give it whatever name. I'm not sure the best name. But here I'm just saying, like, look, on this day, they are charging $6.99 a pound, but they brought 7 pounds. So I'm going to do like that 7.38 times $6.99. That's how much value they brought that day. But then the next day, they brought like 11 pounds and charged $6.99 a pound. So if you multiply those two things, that's the value they brought that day. Is that okay? That's why I'm doing this quantity times price. That's just how much like value they're bringing to the market that day. And then you could just ask, well, just how much stuff are they bringing in? So I'm creating 2 new columns. First of all, I'm just asking how much stuff did they bring? So like 7.38, 10.96. how much value did they bring, that quantity times what they're charging for it. And then what you can do is an average, taking all that into account. So I'm going to do quantity times original price, that sum, divided by sum of quantity, round that to 2 decimal places. So what I'm doing is just, I'm taking into account they have different quantities for different days. So I'm just going to add up the entire quantity column to get a total amount they brought, and then I'm adding up all the value they brought. So this is just saying, take the value divided by the stuff they brought. That's sort of a more accurate average price. And then we can output like that query. Okay, so again, all I'm saying is when you take an average, it's like, what do you want to average exactly, right? So here, what this is saying is vendor 7, they brought in a total of like $32,000 worth of value, their quantity times what they're charging. They brought in a total of like 11,000-ish amount of stuff, like 11,000 pounds of tomatoes or whatever, right? So if you want sort of a more accurate average price, you can just take the value they brought divided by the amount of stuff they brought, and that gives you sort of a more accurate average price. It requires a more sophisticated query. So it's not, this query is not treating every $6.99 the same, right? This original query I did, just asking it, what's the average of the numbers you see in that column? Every $6.99 was treated exactly the same. But this query that's highlighted here is saying, no, don't treat every $6.99 the same. Take that $6.99, multiply it by how much stuff they brought to get sort of a value of what they brought that day. Add up all the stuff they brought, and then use the total quantity as your denominator. It's maybe a better average. So now the $6.99s aren't treated all the same. $6.99s are kind of weighted by how much stuff you brought that day. Anyway, as always, with any programming language, when you ask a question like this, you just have to be clear about what you mean. This first query is a literal answer. Just, I see a $6.99, I see another one, I'll average those up. Whereas this one is thinking more deeply about what you might actually want. Like, no, not really the... Again, if this isn't clear, let's bring up the original table. Like that. These two 6.99s maybe shouldn't be treated the same. Maybe they should, but maybe they shouldn't, because this $6.99 per pound, if you're bringing in 7 pounds, you brought less value that day than when you charged $6.99 and brought in 11 pounds. So the second query is like doing that multiplication and then taking averages of that. That's what this query is doing right here. Okay, so anyway, so you can take averages within a table if you want to. Let me pause and ask questions on either the first query or the second query. Is it clear what the second query is doing and how it's different from the first one?
What does the first one and the second one doing again?
So the first one is just literally like it ignores the quantity column. It's just like, oh, $6.99, $6.99, $6.99, and then eventually it sees $3.49. It just averages all that.
So yeah, it's just looking at vendor ID and the original price.
Yeah.
It's not taking into effect how much do they sell or
Yeah,
not.
how much stuff they got.
Yeah. So it's like a weighted average essentially. You're looking at a basic average versus a weighted average.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So here, like this $3.49 maybe should count for more than that $3.49 because they brought more stuff. So they're bringing, if I just ask you, well, how much value did they show up with that day? Well, 34 pounds times $3.49 is how much they brought, how much they sold, I guess, presumably, you know. So this $3.49 maybe should have more weight than this $3.49 or this $3.49. Just depends on what you want from the data, right? So here, this one's giving you a weighted average of what they brought. Because again, like it's showing you, like if we brought 32,000 worth of value, and we got that 32,000 worth of value off of 11,000 pounds, you might just want to do that division. That tells you sort of your average price you're getting off of that. It just all depends on what you want from the data. Other questions on that? But anyway, yeah, you can take an average of a variable grouped by buckets if you want to. That's the point of this. Okay, so averages we've done. Now let's do halving. So that's next on our list. What does a halving clause look like? So we can finally get all, 7 things in here for a full query. Okay. So let me just give you the basic idea. So let me start with a query with no halving so we can talk about what a halving might do for you. So I'm going to select the vendor ID. Oh, I shouldn't have gotten rid of all this. Okay. Yeah, so when I was building my notes, I anticipated just copying. Here we go. So let me keep this query up. This one. So we'll just mess with this one. Okay, so again, this is giving like an average price where you take quantity into account across the data. So as we've talked about before, you can do wheres on things like this. So you could do something like this. Where market date between like this. So the exact dates don't matter here. I'm just like throwing them up. So between July 18th of 2019 and July 18th, 2020. Is that okay? You can add a where. Now what's important to note here is this where it's happening, it's a filtering statement, so it's conditional. It's cutting data out before you do the group by. So when I run this, it's showing me these averages only between these two dates. So like this filtering statement, it ignores all the data up front that's outside that date range, and then it groups by ID. Is that okay? So it's filtering, like you got this big spreadsheet in there, right? It filters that spreadsheet first, and then it's like, oh, you want me to group by? And then it groups by. Is that okay? So think of this as like taking scissors to your spreadsheet before the group by happens, right? Is that okay?
Maybe explain why that's like a big issue.
Well, it's not a big issue. It's just if I take it out, then notice these numbers, not the top one, but these numbers are different.
Okay.
It's because it's going through the entire spreadsheet, grouping by ID, and then taking this average thing we were doing, right? Here it's not doing that. It's going through the spreadsheet, but only for dates that are marked like that. And then it collapses by vendor ID and does your averaging.
Where it should be doing the averaging first.
And that's why in SQL, the where comes before the group by. It's showing you, I'm going to do this where thing first. So once you've done the group by though, right? Once you've created this table down here, you might want to filter again. So you might care about like average price over $2, average price over $10, whatever. You see what I'm saying? So like this where sort of helps create this output down here. But once you have this output down here, you might want to filter again. Like, well, like I said, like where average price is greater than 50 cents. You know, things like that. So if you want to filter again on this output down here, you use what's called a halving statement. So now I could do something like this. Total quantity greater than 5,000 or something. And so notice down here, oh yeah, I forgot. Okay. So sorry, let me take this out for a second. And not 5,000. Oh yeah, 5,000. Okay. So notice down here, if I do something like that, like total quantity greater than 5,000, it should ignore this 3240, right? So that's what I'm saying, filtering after you've done a group by versus before. This where, this happens before you do the grouping. Then you group, and then you can ask, well, can you filter after that? Okay, so now let me uncomment this, and let me just say that here we bump up against something I couldn't figure out. Your book claims that this should run. So if you read your book, it's like, do this. And then they show you some sample output. As you can see, it's not running for me. And it's pointing at total quantity and being like, what's that? Right? I don't know what that means. And so a response you could scream at your computer is, I told you up there what that means. See that? I told you, computer, total quantity, like I defined it up here, right?
But is it ignoring that since it's already ran the group? No.
No, because your book says this should run just fine.
Right.
So I don't know why this doesn't run. I mean, I couldn't figure it out. I spent a bunch of time on Google, right? Like in Stack Exchange trying to figure out. I don't know. I don't know if it's like a Postgres like update or something, which would be weird that an update would cut out features. But anyway, for you it might run actually, because for your book it runs. But I just have to do this. So instead of total quantity, just like it knows what this means, because quantity is a variable in the spreadsheet. So this will work. And again, I don't know why what your book claims will work doesn't work. But notice if I take this out, there are 3 lines, one of which has total quantity less than 5,000. So if I put this line back in, I'm saying I want that total quantity, which I can't use that name, unfortunately, but some quantity is the same thing. Where total quantity is greater than 5,000, it'll filter that out and show you just those 2 lines. Is that okay? So it's like we filtered up front. We told it, only think about between these dates. I don't care about outside these dates. So it sliced off a bunch of the spreadsheet up front. Then it grouped by, creating output like this. And then once it grouped by, we could ask it, yeah, but like, I kind of want to put a where on this, you know? So this having, think of it as just another where. Like where my sum is greater than 5,000. But you can't use where again, right? They already used that. So having is just like another where. This where occurs before you've grouped. This where occurs after you've grouped.
Okay, that makes sense. So that's why you put it. So we can't have multiple. Instead of you trying to do multiple, like where, comma, where this, where that, right?
Well,
You will, due to like the way you're filtering it, because you want to filter it after.
that's right.
See that? Okay, that makes sense now.
Yeah.
That's what I was kind of hiccuping on. Was like, why can't you just put comma? Okay, I also want to make.
Because this is like,
quantity.
oh yeah, like in here, yeah. Because this is
Yeah.
like a new table you've made.
Right.
So at this point in the code, you haven't made a new table. You just sort of like in the original table, forget about a bunch of stuff, right?
So what would happen if you were to try and do? Would you get the same answer if you were trying to do this? If you did the where above?
You try to do like here.
Yeah. Just like inhabit as and total
Oh,
quantity.
yeah. Yeah. So if you try this, well, first of all, it might still get mad about that name, total quantity. But if you were to try it, SQL is going to think you're making some sort of category error. Yeah, so let me put in this. So it stops yelling at me about the name. So, okay. It says aggregate functions are not allowed in a where. So that's its way of telling you, like, aggregate functions occur after a new table has been created, after I've grouped by. This where isn't doing that. It's taking the original table and filtering on that. So it's basically telling you you've made some sort of category error here. Like, I don't know what to do with that. Whereas here, if I put it down here, it's like, okay, first I filter the original table. I ignore the dates I don't want. I then create this new output. So this is like a new table. Then you want to filter on that new table. That's where you have to do the having. So it's like, it's almost like it's happening in time, right? So first you select from there, filter on that, then we group by, and then we filter on the group by.
Right. I think that's why I was initially confused because I thought you could just add on to the where. And then
Yeah, right. So unfortunately you can't, yeah.
Right.
But it is nice to have those two concepts separated, right? Do you want it to filter before you've grouped or after you've grouped? And so where is for one and having is for the other. And I mean, unfortunately, again, if you want to filter on average price, your book claims you can just write average price down there, but it's not going to let me do it. So if you want that to be greater than 0.5, you could do that, right? Again, it only shows me 2 rows, it ignores the 0.5. Anyway, that's how a having works. Filtering, but filtering on the grouped table. Questions on that? Let me just pause and ask, is it clear the structure, like what this where is doing versus what this having is doing? Like, so Blaine and I have been talking, right? And I keep saying this occurs before you've grouped on the original spreadsheet, and this having occurs after you've grouped on the new spreadsheet. Does that make sense?
It does for me, at least at this point.
Okay.
We've been chatting.
That makes sense for everybody else? Okay. So before we finish with case statements and grouping by, let me just point out, we now have this complete structure going, which is nice. So at this point in the course, I've now taught you everything I need to teach you to avoid getting fired or something, or getting removed from this course. So if we didn't cover this, I mean, they would kick me out of this course, right? And send me back to Calculus 1 or something, I don't know. But this is like the bones of every SQL query, and we've covered it all now. So that's nice. So high five to everybody. So select what you want to see from whichever tables you want, where, and again, this filters on the original tables, and then you can say, oh, now group by some stuff, and then filter on the group by information, and you can always order the output and put limits on the output. What do you think about that? Pretty nice, right? Okay. So I'm going to be ambitious, and I do want to have you have some time to work on the homework if you want to today, but I do want to, let's just finish the chapter because there's only like 10 minutes left. So let me see what I want to keep. Okay, so now we're going to move on to case statements with group by. And this actually, as we learn more things, we keep being able to unleash more and more power. So this next example I'm going to show you is pretty nice in terms of the power you have. So I'm going to, I think, keep all this, but I'm going to clear this out and copy and paste it back later. So let me just throw it somewhere. So before I show you the question I want to ask where a case statement would be useful, I want to run this query. So I'm going to look at the tables, customer purchases, ID, and the product table. Quantity type. I think these come from the product table. So I'm just going to join those two tables. So this is just chapter 5 right here. I'm going to join customer purchases, and the product table. And both those tables have product ID, so I can just glue them together along that. So I don't have a question yet, but I want to run this join just to see what is outputted. Oh, no. If you're on a PC, you know how to fix this. I'm just going to leave it like this. Okay, so what's it mad about? C, P. Okay, so sorry, quantity comes from customer purchases. Anyway, so here's a joining of customer purchases and product. And what I want you to notice is that product quantity type, there are basically two kinds of product quantity type. There's pounds, what it's showing here. And if I scroll for a ways, it changes to unit. So your quantity type can either be unit or pounds. And unit, I think, was something like small, big, large, just something that wasn't pounds, not a weight like that. So just notice that product quantity type, there's only two values, pounds or units. Is that okay? And if you wanted to see that, like, you could also just, of course, ask it, like, hey, distinct product. Like, you'd always run a command like this if you want to, from product. Like, you could just ask it, show me product types. And so it says either pounds, unit, or nothing. Right, so sometimes we have no information. But generally speaking, product quantity type, you either have pounds or not pounds in unit. And there's a handful of nulls. Okay, so first I just want you to notice that. Is that okay? So one thing you might want to do is, given this binary of pounds or not pounds, what you might want to do is ask a question like this. So, for each customer on each day, you can start to see the grouping by there, right? So for each customer on each day, how much quantity did the customer buy of type pounds and type quantity, or sorry, type unit. So there are two different types of product. For each customer, how much did they buy of one kind versus how much did they buy of the other kind? So what that means is, if we look here in the output, on this day, customer 14, they bought 0.99 pounds of something. They also bought 2.18 pounds of something, right? So I'd want to add those two numbers together and count that as going towards the pounds type of thing they bought. Customer 14 on this day, they may have also bought a certain amount of units, right? But how could you, for each customer, decide how much of each kind they bought? How much of like a pound kind of thing or how much of a unit kind of thing? How could you do something like that? And the answer involves, you can use a case statement. So case statements were nice for building, it was sort of like an if, right? So building columns that flagged things was the way we use them. So we can flag type pounds or type unit, and then we can sum based off of that. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to build it in steps, though. Okay, so first I'm going to build 3 new columns. And let's see. I'm going to get rid of some of the fluff I don't need, though. So I'm going to keep market date. I'm going to keep customer ID because I definitely need that. And then I'm going to build 3 new columns using case statements. Product, quantity, type, equals. So this is just like a 0-1 flag, which we did quite a bit back in chapter 3 or 4. I don't remember. Chapter 4. Okay, so there's a case statement, an individual case statement. So see if you understand what's happening when I do this case. When product quantity type is units, then I'm going to record the quantity I saw. Otherwise, I'm going to record a 0 because it's just a different type of thing that I don't care about. So if you see pounds, you're going to record a 0. If you see unit, you're going to record the quantity that you saw. Is that okay? So I want to do the same thing for the other 2 types of quantities. So I also had pounds. Oops, I got to separate these with commas, don't I? They're each new columns. And then I also had no information. So I'm going to record that like this. So if my product quantity type is neither unit nor pounds, then quantity L0, and I'll call this quantity other or something. You know, whatever. So I'm going to let you type all that. But also, as you're typing, see if you agree with what I'm claiming is happening here. I'm creating 3 new columns. Each column records the quantity of stuff it saw, but only for certain types of things. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's like a one-hot encoding for product quantity type, yeah, if you like that language from chapter 4. Like, though. So notice a one-hot encoding, a literal one-hot encoding, I put a 1 right there. But instead I'm just recording how much stuff I saw. So it's like a quantity hot encoding or something. Okay, so I just want to run this and see that we all agree with what's happening. So on July 7th, 2019, this customer, 14, they bought nothing of this quantity type. they bought 0.99 pounds of something else, right? And they bought nothing of other. And then they made another transaction, right? Is that okay? But on this date, we're seeing this customer 14, they didn't buy anything of type unit, they bought 2 things of type pounds. Is that okay? So these 3 columns at the end are the ones those case statements made just now. If you scroll far enough, eventually people are buying unit type things. I think those are flowers and stuff like that. There we go, okay. So finally, here are some people buying unit stuff. So this customer made 2 separate transactions, or sorry, customer 11 bought 1 unit of something that wasn't type pounds, and then customer 12 also did that. So this is like 1 bouquet of flowers or something, I don't know. And there weren't that many nulls, so this third column should be zeros most of the time. I'm not going to keep scrolling because there's 4,000 rows, but. So is that okay, what we built there? And then, if you want to answer this question, now we got to ask, like, for each person, so for this customer 14, I need for each day and for each customer to add up these kinds of numbers, but per type. So, like, suppose there was a 1 right there and a 0.99 there, right? We want to keep those numbers separate because we care about, for each customer, how much quantity does the customer buy of each type. So these 2 columns, you don't want them to interfere with each other. But for this customer 14, on July 3rd, you want to add up the 0.99 pounds and 2.18 pounds to get a quantity that they bought that day. Is that okay? So that's where now finally we can do a group by year. So notice we haven't done anything from chapter 6 yet. So now what I want to do is, I'm going to start building this up. Okay, so what would the group by look like? I'm going to group by market date and customer ID. So each market date is its own bucket, and then within each date, each customer is their own bucket. And then the question is, how do you get SQL to like add those 2 numbers together? So it knows now that like July 3rd, 2019 and customer 14, that's now the bucket, right? How do you get it to add these things up? Off these columns you just created, and the answer is like this. You can literally put, well, like sum up the quantities you see. And notice I'm careful about where I put my parenthesis. You have to put it after the end, but before you give the column a name. So tell it just, again, like these new columns I created, just add up the quantities you see per type. So this is pretty complicated here if you think about it, right, what's happening. I created 3 new columns, and now I want SQL to add within those columns, but not add the entire columns together or something, right? I wanted to first think about that each market date is its own bucket and each customer is their own bucket. So July 3rd, 2019 gets collapsed, and then customer ID 14 gets collapsed, and then you want it to add within all that. So you can do that. You can add these values from these columns we created. So now it knows like that 0.99 and 2.18 should get added together, but 0.99 and 2.18 should not get added to 1.53. Right? Why should these first 2 numbers not get added to that third number? It's a different customer, right? So if I took this out, this customer ID right here, if I removed that, it would add those first 3 numbers together. But I've told it market date and customer ID. Okay, so if I run this, unless I made a typo, oh, looks like I did. Perhaps you meant to reference. Did I mean to reference that? Oh, yeah. It's right, it knew. Okay, so here you go. So I didn't order it or anything, but on this market date, this customer bought 5 units worth of the unit type of thing. And this customer bought 11 units of that. If we scroll far enough, let's see. This customer, customer 5, on August 8th, 2020, they bought 14 units of type unit, and then they bought almost 10 pounds of something else, right? So you can see for each customer on each day how much of each type of stuff they bought off of this case statement. If you didn't set up this case structure, like if you didn't bifurcate the, oh, sorry, Bryce, let me scroll down. If you didn't bifurcate by type, it's not clear how you would do this, right? If you wanted to know just for these two types of things, how much of each type did we buy? Without a case statement, it's not clear how you would do that. But here we're adding up quantities. I mean, technically we're also adding up zeros, right? But we're just adding up quantities of each type for each customer on each day. So again, let me just point out, this is pretty complicated what we're doing here. At least to me, it strikes me as complicated. Is it clear what the structure of that is?
So how come you have to group by like both of them again?
Well, so you don't have to. It just depends on the question you're asking. So like here, suppose you group just by market date. You can do that, and it'll still run. I say that. Oh, oops, I need a comment here, right? Every time you comment stuff out, you gotta be careful. It'll still run. But what it's showing you is like, see the customer ID is gone. It's showing you on this date, so October 30th, 2019, just at the market that day, 67 units of type unit were bought and nothing of type pounds was bought. So it's not grouping by customer at all. Like all the customers are still together. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And same thing. So you could ask that question, right? So on each day, that's the question this is answering.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Other questions on this?
For like the third case statement,
Mm-hmm.
are you just asking for like the null values?
Yeah, so I mean,
Could you just say not null
you could say, well, here you'd want it to be is null.
or is null? Sorry.
Yeah.
Just do that.
So you certainly could do that. It all depends on how comfortable you are with the data. So here, I just did this because like, in general, there might be some other outliers that you don't care about. So this is a catch-all, just whatever. If you don't see a unit, don't see pounds. Imagine there was also like a kilogram category or something, which there's not. But maybe there's a kilogram category you don't care about. So you just throw it into this last little category.
So how are we gonna give the quantity if it's a null value?
Oh, because it's the type that might be null. So you might still know how much you sold, but for some reason in the spreadsheet, they might not know what type it was. Yeah, that's a good question though. Yeah. Yeah, so if you don't know the quantity, when it's summing, it's just ignoring nulls and quantity. I think there weren't any nulls and quantity, but yeah, here you're asking it to like add up a bunch of quantities, right? It'll just ignore the nulls because it doesn't, like null plus stuff, it doesn't know what to do with, it just kicks it out. But Bryson's question points to how complicated this query is, right? Like there's a lot of variables floating around.
Wait, so what does the quantity do then? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so here when we've made the table that we're making with this join, I just wanted to separate out these two kinds of things, unit versus pounds. And so if you were type pounds, I wanted to record how much quantity there was. Like if it was 5.5 pounds, I wanted to record that. So that's why I put a quantity there. Like, hey, if you see pounds, record how many pounds you saw. That's what the quantity is.
Okay, that's it.
But if you don't see pounds, then I don't care. I just put a 0. No pounds. I don't care. And same thing with unit. Show me how many units there were. Otherwise, just record a 0.
Because generally, like you could say at the farmer's market, the only time you're using pounds is if you're selling fruit. So then you can
Sure.
sort by that pounds column and know that we sold this amount of fruit every day.
Yeah.
Because it's just based off of how you counted the quantity.
Yeah, so unit would be, they're selling flowers, right? So instead of measuring pounds of flowers, you'd measure the number of bouquets, right? Like I sold 5 bouquets. So you would expect a lot of these unit things to be whole numbers a lot of the times, right? Whereas pounds wouldn't be. Yeah. But again, it all just depends on what do you want from the database? Like maybe you don't care at all about pounds versus not pounds, in which case you wouldn't write this query, So
Can you run yours and can I see the top? I don't think I'm getting the same output.
Yeah, I can't swear that the different Postgresses or whatever, like,
Okay.
I'm not sure how it's deciding how to order this. If you want to make sure you get the exact same output, you could also, we could order by, oops, so I'll just tell it to order by, I'll respect the grouping. Now this should be the same. So it starts back in April 2019. Okay, so I want to finish today by just again pointing out you can do whatever you want with this. So up front, like right here, if you only cared about the year 2020, I don't know, you could type it something like this, right? So you can slice out pre-2020 and post-2020 data before you do this if you feel like. You can put wheres in. You can also put in a halving if you want to. So here we could ask like you could ask it, just show me the customers that bought something of each type of thing. So customers who bought some poundage of fruit and then also bought, some flowers or something, I don't know. So if you want to do that, what I really want to type is this. This is what I'm saying. I want to type this. So they bought some non-zero amount of units and some non-zero amount of pounds. Your book claims this will run. Again, I don't know why it doesn't for me. It might run for you. So if that's what you want, you got to be like, all right, fine. It looks a mess, but that's what I want to be bigger than 0. That's the name, quantity, unit, and then all this stuff. So it's going to go way off the screen. So I can't use those aliases, but the alias means this. So this will show me customers who bought positive amounts of both types. So on July 3rd, 2019, customer 9, they bought 2 units of bouquets or something, and then they bought 5 pounds of vegetables or something. So again, the way you write depends on what you want from things, but you could throw in a halving, you can throw in a where, or whatever. You could also, of course, I don't ever use this limit thing because I don't know why people really care about it. But like if I don't want to look past the first 5 entries, I just don't look past the 5 first entries. Right? So whatever, you can tell it's a limit. Everything from previous chapters you can do. Questions, comments on that? Okay, so I took too long up here probably to finish off the chapter. We're not done with chapter 6, so problems will be due on Friday. As always, though, especially with this more complicated stuff, I don't really know how long things take, actually. So if you find as a class that Friday is too stringent for, like if some of the problems are too hard or something, right, you can just let me know. We can push the problems back if you want to.